Hello basketball coaches and basketball players, my name is Alan from Al's Basketball Training, and today I'm going to talk to you about timeouts in basketball. I've been asked basically what you should do during a timeout, before a timeout, that kind of thing. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first off, when you call a timeout, there's generally speaking two types of timeouts. There's a full as well as a 30-second timeout. Now, full timeout is a 60-second, 30 seconds is obviously 30 seconds. Now, from there, what do I normally do when I call a timeout? Well, first off, I like to try and coordinate with my assistant coach to see what he sees in the game versus what I see in the game. Now, what you normally have is, at least at the youth level, is before you actually call the timeout, you start talking because you generally only have those few seconds. Now, at the pro level, they're able to kind of get together on the court, talk, mingle, then get to the players, and then talk to the players. Generally speaking, you don't have that much time, especially if you have somebody who is very early on that timeout clock. And if they're pressing it as soon as you're calling it before even the referee starts whistling, you don't have a lot of time. Now, getting down to it, what we normally talk about comes down to what the time of the game really is. So first off, what I like to talk about is if we are starting off the game, we're not doing so well, we're down by 8, 9, 10, 12 points, and we haven't scored any at all, or we might have only scored 2, or whatever it may be, I always like to say and see what my players are thinking, what they're feeling about on the court, and also what we're really lacking. So, for example, if we're getting trapped early on and we're not able to advance the ball past half court or whatever it may be, we're trying to fix those behaviors. Hey, we need to start passing the ball around the perimeter. We start needing to reverse the ball to get it past half. Whatever it may be, we need to really start looking after the behaviors and what we need to correct on the court. Next is then the plays. So if, let's say the other team called the timeout. If you know that the other team's about to call a timeout, you still talk to your assistant coach, see what he sees. Ask what he sees. Obviously, at that point in time, the other team is trying to correct what they're doing wrong. They're trying to correct their bad behaviors. So now you need to go in there proactively and say, okay, first off, the other team, they know like they're not reversing the ball right now, or they're not passing it around the perimeter. We're running a 2-3 zone, and they're running a man-to-man offense. So what we need to do now is run on defense. We need to be running our man-to-man defense because they're going to be coming out playing a zone offense. And now because they were thinking that we were running a man-to-man, but really the coach has seen that we were not, we need to now go in and change things up a bit. So that's kind of the advantage of being up ahead. You can't go in there and say, yo, like let's run like triangle 6 horns 2 in our next 2 possessions. That's generally not something that I would be going into a timeout being ahead looking to run. What I would be looking at doing is saying they're going to be trying to correct this and this behavior. So now if we're trapping them at half court, for example, and we already know that, hey, they're calling a timeout because they're not reversing the ball to get it past half. Now I can say, okay, we're going to be really jamming them a hard full court 1-2-1-1. And now that reverse pass, Bob or Connor or Jenny or whoever it is, you need to be really up higher on that press because they're going to be reversing the ball. They're going to be overemphasizing passing that ball and reversing because that's 100% what that coach is going to be talking about. So you now need to get up there and start running a really tight press so that we can get that steal on that reverse pass. Whatever it may be, let's say they're not let's say they're reversing that ball on or passing that ball around the perimeter, and they're not doing it right now, but we're going to be running a man-to-man so we can play a bit tighter. We don't necessarily need to be so loose and very deep on help defense. We can play a little bit tighter so that they can't pass that ball around on their offense. Things like that, you can, even though if you're down, you're going to be correcting. if you're ahead, what you're going to be doing is now promoting a little bit tighter defense or whatever it may be, just so that they don't get a little bit of a run going. That's the worst thing that can happen to a team that's ahead, is the other team calls a timeout, and that team that's ahead is talking about what cool plays they're about to run, and when in reality they should be talking about defense and about what the other team offensively is going to be trying. Now that can be flipped as well. So they might be doing really well offensively. They might not be making their shots, but we're really killing them on offense. Their defense is not really reacting very well. So then it kind of changes at that point. It's not an offensive issue. It's now a defensive issue for them. And what we need to start doing at that point is they're going to be trying to force us to the 3-point line. Now, if that happens, we already know that they're going to be playing us very tight. Or at least we think that they'll be playing us really tight. So what we needed to start now running is not some special cool play, but some play that we already have in our arsenal that we already know, and that's going to be able to feed the low post. So whatever plays we were even running before, we can still run those, but we want to be able to really load that low post. And the reason why we want to load the low post is because they're going to be trying to force 3-point shots on us. And that's going to allow us to open up possible cutting lanes or even actual open 3-point shots. So if you have a 3-point shooting team, that might not be the worst thing ever. And that strategy basically happens throughout the whole entire game up until roughly the fourth quarter, which is still technically you're going to be calling a timeout to fix behaviors on what's happening on the court or whatever. Personally, I would never call a timeout if I'm ahead, and that's just something that I disagree with. If you're ahead, let the other team waste a timeout. But then you have to also think some coaches really just like to have a conversation with their players. Now, if that's the case, if you just want to have a conversation with your players, that's totally fine. Wait until there's a dead possession, and you don't have to even call a timeout. You can just if you want to say, yo guys, let's try play number 6 or whatever it is, we haven't ran it all game, you can quite literally just yell it out to them. You don't have to call a timeout. I've seen so many coaches who are up by 10, 12 points with 5 or 6 minutes left calling a timeout saying, yo, we need to try something new. The only time I want to see you trying something new is if you're up by 40 points. And I even talk to by players like that, where if they're going out being like, yo, we're up by 10 with 3 minutes left, I want to do some crazy crossover, back breaking, ankle breaking, smashing dunk or whatever, that's when I'll call a timeout and say, you guys need to settle down because it's 10 points in 3 minutes, which means that quite literally they could score in even half the possessions and they're going to win the game. So at that point, you really need to wrangle your team together if you're calling a timeout if you're ahead. Now, if you're behind, same idea. However, at this point, you might be changing your offensive structure. So if you're down by 10, you might be looking at trying to run some plays that are trying to get some 3-point shots. You might be trying to run some plays that are getting some cutters down the middle of the key so that you can pop off a pass to them so they can get an and one layup. Things like that. Now, through the middle of the game, you can also call a timeout, and I've done this many, many times, where you can call a timeout and sit your point guards or your guards down and say, if you have number 6 guarding you, who's on the other team, if he's guarding you, I want you to drive to the basket on him. If he's guarding you in the full court, I want you dribbling the ball past him. He's in foul trouble, we need to get him out of the game. I don't care how good or how bad he is, he's in foul trouble, he needs to get out of the game. The only time I really don't care if a player is in foul trouble is if he's one of the worst players on the team. However, generally speaking, fourth quarter, if you're down, and down by not much, you're going to be having the other team's best players on the court. So if they're in foul trouble, make sure to really hammer the ball at them so that you can really be able to get them out of the game. Because I would much rather have a second string player trying to play us than a starter or one of their best players with or without foul trouble. So if he's got foul trouble, go for it. Definitely go for it. I've had a game where I was coaching in Burlington, Ontario. We were playing against Oakville. They had this killer point guard, and I said right at the beginning of the game, whoever has that guy on you, we're not playing a box and one on defense to try and cover this guy. What we're going to be doing is basically getting him fouled out. And I want whichever guard who he's guarding to drive towards the rim, somebody to set a screen for him or whatever, but to drive towards the rim and be able to dribble past him in the full court. And by halftime, he had 4 fouls. He was sitting all the third quarter, and when he got back into the fourth quarter, he was only playing for 1 to 2 minutes, and he was out because we were taking it to them. And the rest of their team was really good, but he was kind of like the Kawhi Leonard kind of all-star man who was like the best on the team, and we needed him out. And we ended up winning that game, and we were actually a worse team than them. So that just gives you a little bit of perspective. If you're going to be seeing that the other team's has one insanely amazing player, 100%. Call a timeout. It doesn't matter if you're tied, and say, yo, number 10, he is a guy who is going to be lighting us up this game. If he's guarding you, drive towards the rim. If he's guarding you in the full court, take it to him, and he's going to be fouled out. I try and get the other team's best players fouled out, and that's how I do it. I hope that this video about timeouts has helped you. I've heard of some coaches, and I've even been part of some teams as a player who have called timeouts with 2 minutes left, being up by 20 and being like, yo, what should we have for lunch today? It's been a fantastic day. We got 2 minutes left, and I'm feeling pizza. What are you guys feeling? Subway, pizza? Let's take a vote. Don't ever call a timeout for that. You're wasting a timeout, and I hope to God that if you call a timeout talking about food with 2 minutes left, you're going to lose the game, because we almost lost that game that day. And believe me, it's not a good feeling, especially when you're a competitive guy like me who wants to win every single game. Anyways, I hope that you have enjoyed today's video. If you have, hit that like button, subscribe. I hope I haven't rambled on way too much today, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow, actually later on today, for the second video of the day.